Now, before we get into all the issues of sitting and the movements of the body and finding good support and that sort of thing, I want to talk to you a little bit about the modern computer keyboard and the ways in which the keyboard has changed over the years and how that kind of affects the whole game of posture and movement at the desk. Now, the modern computer keyboard, this one is an iPad with one of these little handy portable keyboards attached. The thing to know about the modern computer keyboards is that the amount of force that it takes to press the key down and produce a character on the screen is almost zero. The modern smartphone, you can just touch the screen. There's really very little force that's necessary. In the old days, they had the manual typewriters. And manual typewriters took a lot more force to press the key down, to generate the push that moved the key, that hit the lever, that threw the ink onto the page. It took a lot more energy and force to move those levers on the keyboard. And because it took more, people typed differently back then. To use a manual typewriter, you'll often see people, they're going away like this. You can look at the old black and white movies where the reporters are all and the larger levers of the arms, the upper arm, the elbow, the forearm, these larger levers had to be in motion. Because if you just rested the wrists at the edge of the computer and just moved your fingers like this on a manual typewriter, it would exhaust you in a matter of seconds. Nobody would think of doing that. It's an obviously inefficient way to do things. But as the computer keyboards got more and more modern, the touch changed on the keyboard, and this changed the relationship of the way you seem to have to move your body in relationship to the keyboard. Now, when I was consulting at the New York Times, one of the stories that was told to the people in the courses that we taught was about these two spikes of force. There was some research done on cumulative trauma disorders and RSI, repetitive strain injury, that sort of thing. And one of the things that some of the researchers found was that there are really two spikes of force that happen when the person goes to press the key down to produce a character on the screen. The first spike of force is when the finger initially makes contact with the key, just when it touches the surface and meets the resistance of the spring inside the key. The second spike of force is when the person pressed all the way through the resistance and came to the bottom of the key bed. And that second spike of force was often much larger than the first spike of force. And if you've ever been in a newsroom, you know there's a kind of a social aspect, the amount of noise, everyone's working on their story and people tend to type louder and then the person next to them types louder because they're typing louder. There were these kind of social elements going on as well. Now these two spikes of force were interesting because the second spike of force was really unnecessary. You didn't need to go all the way down to the very bottom of the key bed to produce a character on the screen. For a lot of the computer keyboards in the beginning, you only had to go a certain way down, maybe halfway down, maybe 2/3 of the way down. But you didn't have to jam your finger all the way down into the bottom of the key bed. Now pianists also know about this because on a piano keyboard, there's a certain amount that the key has to go down in a certain speed in order to move the lever to throw the hammer at the string inside the piano. And the level at which you have to sync to is called the escapement level. And any good, efficient pianist with good technique tries to find exactly where that escapement level is and then doesn't have to generate all that extra force to always press to the very, very bottom of the key, because that second spike of force is usually the injurious spike of force. Now, with the modern keyboard, that's really no longer an issue. It requires so little force. You can just barely put any effort through your fingers and the character will appear on the screen. The problem that it creates, though, is it appears like you can just use your fingers. And so what people often do is, and they've done this ever since computers were around and electric typewriters were around, as the keyboards got thinner and thinner, they rest their wrists on the edge of the desk. And then they just type with just the movements of the fingers and the hand covering the lateral distances over the keyboard. And for certain people, this doesn't represent a problem, but I will tell you that it absolutely changes the way the rest of your body participates in the movements of your fingers. As soon as you rest the wrists here on the surface of the desk, you essentially stop any sort of participation in the rest of the arm with the movement of the fingers. You essentially cut off the cooperation between all of the large muscles back in the torso, down in the pelvis maybe, and then even in parts of the arm. You cut off that participation with the fingers. And it's that severing of the relationship by resting the wrists on the desk while you just use the fingers. This is one of the keys to understanding what the gestalt of posture, of bad posture, really comes from. And it's also a key to understanding what the gestalt of good posture means. Because if you can take some advice from a pianist, there is no pianist that rests their wrists on the edge of the piano and then moves their hands around the keyboard. There's simply too much of a large lateral distance to cover on a piano. You need your arms hanging and swinging free to support the resilience and the dexterity and the efficiency of the movement of the hands over the keyboard. The computer, of course, is a much smaller distance to cover. Most of it can be covered by the fingers. But again, the problem is this little error, this error of 1 inch, gets magnified over thousands and thousands of hours and thousands of days working at the computer keyboard. And over time, if we could just start a slow motion or time-lapse photography of this time-lapse video, you'd see that the person that always pins their wrists here, gradually the background, their torso, their head, their pelvis, the background starts to decay and degrade. And they lose the connection of the support of the background out to the hands and the fingers. And you'll see in some of the deep dive lessons that if your weight of your torso is way back here, just to lift the arms now, they feel a lot heavier. And that's because you no longer have a good relationship between the spine and the arms. And so a lot of what we'll get into in the courses later on is understanding how this relationship, both the spacing, but also the muscular synergies, how they work, so that your arms can always feel light. And it's as if you'll move at the computer keyboard as if it were a manual typewriter. You won't have to move your arms up and down quite as much, but you'll have the agility, you'll have the lightness, you'll have the smoothness, you'll have the efficiency, and you'll have the minimal muscular effort that really supports comfort and your posture having a future.